For the first time, the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration has taken action on a petition that would require interstate commercial vehicles, including trucks, to have devices installed that electronically transmit the identity of the vehicle. These so-called unique identification devices would allow law enforcement to identify and perhaps even gather data on drivers and carriers, and monitor the safety condition of commercial vehicles on the highway. But this proposal has raised several important questions. This is the Eyes on the Road Trucking Podcast. I'm Evan Lockridge reporting. Whether they're called unique electronic identification devices, universal identification devices, or just UIDs for short, the fact is they're on the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration's radar now that it's taken action on a petition from the Commercial Vehicle Safety Alliance to begin gathering comments from the trucking industry regarding the devices. So who makes up CVSA? The group is mainly comprised of commercial vehicle law enforcement. This petition comes as CVSA is actively developing what it calls a Level 8 inspection standard, in which it seeks to use electronic transmissions from trucks on the roadway to determine which vehicles require inspections. If the CVSA name sounds familiar, that's because it's the same group that has developed other standards for law enforcement when it comes to commercial vehicle inspections as well as driver inspections. Joining me to talk about the UID proposal and concerns about it is Steve Vaughn, Director of Field Operations for PrePass Safety Alliance. Before working for PrePass, Steve spent nearly 30 years in commercial vehicle law enforcement, including serving as a chief with the California Highway Patrol. He's also a former president of CVSA. Steve, it's good to talk with you.
Thank you, Evan.
Well, to kick things off, can you give us some background on UID, Steve?
Sure, Evan. CVSA originally petitioned FMCSA about the UID in 2010. The petition was ultimately denied by FMCSA. What they indicated at the time was the petition lacked the information necessary to estimate the cost and benefits of the electronic ID mandate. Stymied by FMCSA, CVSA then approached the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, or NHTSA, which has jurisdiction over the vehicle manufacturing standards. They revised the petition requiring UID only on new trucks. NHTSA rejected the petition for many of the same reasons that FMCSA did. While FMCSA later reversed its UID decision in 2015, it has not since taken any formal action to implement the UID, possibly because the stated purpose of CVSA UID petition was to facilitate the wireless roadside inspections, also known as WRI. Key congressional committees discouraged WRI until questions about government monitoring, data privacy, how the technology would be paid for were satisfactorily answered. In my opinion, the term WRI is another term for the CVSA Level 8 inspection, which you mentioned earlier, Evan. Anyway, during the debate for the 2021 infrastructure funding bill last year, several transportation industry stakeholders, including CVSA, supported an amendment requiring that an electronic ID on all new trucks. The groups involved agreed that the UID would be limited to a single point of data, such as the vehicle identification number. The VIN is specific to each vehicle and easily is cross-referenced by government entities to obtain additional information, such as the carrier name, license plate number, or US DOT number. States have laws regarding VINs and criminalizing altering or removing them. The VIN amendment to the infrastructure funding bill passed the House, but got no further.
Okay, so we fast forward to September of 2022, and the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration issues what's called an advance notice of proposed rulemaking about universal identification devices. Now, the plan, commonly known as an ANPRM, is a government term used by federal agencies to test out a proposal or solicits ideas before it drafts a notice of proposed rulemaking, which is the actual rulemaking proposal. So, Steve, what is in this ANPRM advance notice of proposed rulemaking?
The FMCSA advance notice of proposed rulemaking on the unique electronic identification, or UID, begins by asking for comment on the UID as a single point of data. However, it goes much further than that. They also want to know if the UID should transmit information about the motor carrier, such as motor carrier name, contact information, data on the commercial vehicle, including the GPS location, date and time, license plate number, US DOT number, and the gross vehicle weight rating. The ANPRM also asked whether UID should transmit information related to the CMV driver, including personally identifiable information, or also known as PII, commercial driver's license compliance, medical certification information, hours of service, and electronic logging device reports. While FMCSA does ask whether the UID transmission should be limited to non-personally identifiable information, the expanded data set considered in the ANPR would fulfill the requirements for level 8 inspections, which CVSA is working with FMCSA at this time to develop. The ANPRM does not explore whether information considered proprietary by the motor carrier, such as routes traveled, customers served, cargo carried, should be protected. FMCSA asks whether the pre-trip inspection date and time, GPS coordinates, and the time should be transmitted, both of which could reveal the carrier's route of travel.
Wow, that's a lot of information there, Steve. I'm curious, is there anything in the ANPRM as to how UID could be used to see if a driver has committed, say, a moving violation earlier in the day?
Today's CMVs often have sensors monitoring the mechanical condition and functions of the vehicle components of which enforcement might wish to view. Other information contained on CMV's electronic system could include evidence of past highway infractions, say, for example, excessive speed sometime prior to the UID transmission. The ANPRM does not directly ask for either type of that information, even though the promotion of UID by CVSA from 2010 to the present has referenced either wireless roadside inspections or the level 8 inspections, which would contain some of that information. The ANPRM, it also asks whether UID should be required only on newly manufactured trucks or on all CMVs, new and old, and whether they should also be placed on trailers and semi-trailers. Now, remember, the advance notice of proposed rulemaking merely tests out proposals and solicits ideas. If among the ideas submitted in comments to the ANPRM or found in the CVSA petition are, for example, the capture of level 8 vehicle information or driver's hours of service compliance, those ideas could become part of an FMCSA universal ID rulemaking proposal known as the Notice of Proposed Rulemaking, which will provide opportunity for additional comment.
Steve, I'm curious, would there be any safety benefits of requiring universal identification for all commercial vehicles?
CVSA desires to have a law enforcement, quote, touch more CMVs than today's weigh station and roadside inspections can achieve, and in doing so, theoretically would improve highway safety. Effectively, CVSA wants to use the UID electronic transmissions to help initiate the level 8 inspection process so they can screen those CMVs, which may have a potential safety issue. The challenge is that no study, data, or other evidence proves that a UID alone offers any safety benefit beyond systems currently in use. Conversely, in certain scenarios, UID would allow trucks most in need of extra attention at the inspection sites to drive on by undetected. While there are laws in states that permit states to inspect trucks and require those trucks to enter inspection facilities, many states have a probable cause statute founded on constitutional due process concerns, and any enforcement action against an individual or vehicle must be based upon observation of a violation. So a big question is, will electronically identifying a vehicle or individual through a UID mechanism or through a level 8 inspection allow enforcement action to take any action when an officer is not present? Due process concerns were among those raised by Congress when they were reviewing the wireless roadside inspection years ago. In comparison, electronic waste station bypass programs. There's two major private systems and several operated by jurisdictions. Overcome due process concerns because they are voluntary in nature and allow participation only by motor carriers with superior safety records, as measured by official government records. Carriers can review and, if necessary, challenge those records, whereas motor carriers cannot, on the other hand, challenge a UID transmission.
Some interesting points there, Steve. To me, all of this raises some questions. What would be inspected? Who would be inspected? And where would these inspections take place?
What you have in the ANPRM appears to address UID, a Level 8 inspection, and some aspects of the AV program.
The AV program being about autonomous vehicles.
The what would be inspected question relates to the questions asked in the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration's ANPRM. That is, what data would be transmitted by a UID? Every safety-conscious motor carrier and professional truck driver out there wishes to share the road with vehicles and drivers similar in full compliance with regulations. But in a world where every truck is mechanically inspected and every driver is properly credentialed, still does not account for two major sources of highway fatalities. And those would be car-truck crashes, where over 70% of the time the accident is initiated by the passenger car driver, and driver error, specifically speeding. UID does not address those critical safety issues. The effectiveness of the UID could also be limited by who would be inspected. The UID amendment discussed during the infrastructure funding bill debate in Congress would have affected only the newly manufactured trucks. The added cost of that UID might discourage the purchase of some new equipment, which could delay the adoption of many of the advanced safety systems. Clearly, though, older CMVs and the fleets, which utilize older equipment, would not, at least on the onset, be subject to UID monitoring. Many in the enforcement world believe these are the very trucks that need the extra attention. Older trucks are also common in local and short-haul operations where electronic logging devices are often not required. So even broad UID mandate, which included the transmission of driver data, would not capture the hours of service status of many of the drivers. For all those reasons, the safety effectiveness of UID should be questioned, I think. The third question is, where would these inspections take place? Roadside inspections would require safely pulling a truck out of the traffic streams to a location where sufficient room to conduct the inspection. That may not be practical in all situations. Most likely, the inspections would be conducted at existing weigh stations. In fact, the CVSA petition speaks to using UID transmissions as a sorting mechanism, directing those in need of the inspection into the weigh station while allowing compliant trucks to continue on at highway speed. That may sound vaguely familiar. It's the process used by electronic waste station bypass programs today. Except in those programs, the qualified participating motor carriers have voluntarily agreed to be identified, thereby avoiding any due process issues.
Steve, you talked about how a lot of different kinds of data could be flowing from trucks and other commercial vehicles to law enforcement under this proposal from FMCSA. But I'm curious, how will this transmitted data be used?
The stated intention of the UID proposal is reflected in the ANPRM. Goes well beyond simply identifying a vehicle. It appears that they're looking to enhance truck inspections, but there will be a temptation on the part of FMCSA to collect that transmitted data and directly use it in the safety management system ratings of motor carriers. Today, the FMCSA safety management system is fed by truck inspections, citations, crash reports, and investigations. Each of these safety data sources involves some level of direct personal involvement by law enforcement with a truck and a motor carrier. Aggregating UID transmissions for the trucks in a fleet would not require personal contact with the carrier, and it could provide more robust data. Aggregating UID transmission would also deny the motor carrier the opportunity to confront and challenge the data in real time. While some might argue that the online search engines are no different, they already collect a lot of personal data, such as keystrokes and search queries, and use it to generate ads and tailored search results. So why should FMCSA be denied better access to carrier safety data? Well, the answer is that people voluntarily interact with online search engines. When government gets involved, due process requires the ability of that citizen to see and correct the information the government has collected before that can be used. But consider that once they have all the data on drivers, carriers, and trucks, there's nothing that would limit the use of that information to UID or level 8 inspections. If UID is transmitting a truck's GPS location and timestamp along its route, what would prevent a state or federal government from implementing a vehicle miles travel tax system, which has been discussed for years? UID gives them everything they need for a commercial vehicle VMT.
Steve, let's say UID becomes a reality for the trucking industry. What will trucking receive in return?
First off, we have to realize that UID will have a cost. At this point, the very number is unknown. That cost will be built into the price of new equipment or into the price of UID equipment installed in older trucks. UID will require significant new investment by the states in communication equipment, computers, and software. Those investments are in part paid for by private industry and through the state and federal taxes. So there will be a cost to both the states and industry. At the same time, existing electronic wastage bypass programs have made substantial investments at no cost to the states. Motor carriers have voluntarily underwritten those investments through the use of their subscriptions to the programs. In addition, participating motor carriers have committed dollars to equipping their trucks and training their drivers in the use of existing electronic bypass programs. So what will the trucking industry receive in return for the very valuable data it's going to be transmitting in a UID program? The ANPRM is silent about that. And remember that FMCSA promised to provide benefits to motor carriers which were never delivered either when implementing the CSA or the ELD mandates. There's also another concern. A survey of truck drivers in June of 22, 27%, I believe it was, of them would leave the industry if the government data collection proposed with UID became law. UID would exacerbate supply chain issues. These same drivers' voices, however, do not show the path forward to improved highway safety without an intrusive government program. Instead of UIDs, FMCSA should take 3 steps. 1, they manage driver detention and delay at shipper facilities. 2, continue to work on increasing and improving truck parking, which is a huge issue today. And 3, provide better oversight of driver training. Driver detention and inadequate truck parking contribute to truck driver fatigue and hours of service compliance issues. More particularly, they can encourage a driver to speed to make up lost time or find a place to rest. Speeding by both truck drivers and motorists is a major safety issue. By addressing driver detention and truck parking, I believe FMCSA can improve safety without adopting a program that would convince truck drivers to leave the industry. FMCSA made strides towards improving truck driver training through the entry-level driver training program, only to see those steps diluted by the waivers granted under COVID-19, which allowed third parties to serve as both instructors and evaluators of that training. Professional drivers, they can tell when a new recruit has not been truly learned the ropes. It's good to have a truck driver training standard, but only if it is followed in practice. These 3 steps would improve truck safety, I think, all without a new, expensive, and intrusive government program called UID.
That is Steve Vaughn, Director of Field Operations for PrePass Safety Alliance. Steve, thanks very much.
You're welcome, Evan. Thanks for having me.
And you can read more about UID by logging on to the PrePass website at prepass.com. I'm Evan Lockridge. Thank you for listening to the Eyes on the Road Trucking Podcast. And until next time, remember to keep your eyes on the road.